Every morning after AM Prime, I actually read the newspapers from cover to cover. And many a times there are columns that are really, it just catches my attention. But there are some columns that you want to expand further on. And fortunately, at times, we are able to get in contact with the columnist. One such is Mr. Steve Alvarez. He is a project manager. You've seen him many a times on this program, and he's joining me once more following my reading of his column issued yesterday. Do we really care about the issues that matter? Mr. Alvarez is with us via Zoom. Good morning, sir. I think you're muted, sir. I think we've lost you.
I'm not muted though.
Excellent. No, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Alvarez. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning, everyone.
Why does it seem as it's very complex or impossible for government to manage simple things? It's a loaded question, but it's a question that is really a synopsis of the conversation this morning.
Well, I think, let me start, Ketan, by just going back a bit to see how the sad situation that we are in at the moment. We have a situation where people are motivated by money and motivated by personal wealth and personal growth. So, for example, in the politics, you're hearing a lot of people saying, I will fix this. I am the one. I am the best person to be prime minister and so on. And we have not evolved into a country of people that says, listen, we have issues to deal with. Let's deal with these issues and let's fix them. So the simple things like I'll give you an example. WASA can say tomorrow that every time you repair a leak, that you walk with a little bit of asphalt and a plate compactor and you smooth back the road. That could be a policy that can happen immediately. But because no one cares, because it doesn't matter, the contractor would come and he would just dig up the road and then he'd leave a pile of dirt that the cars would go into, and then they would damage the pipe again and it will have a leak again in the same place. It's just simple things that we can do that we just don't care about. And you know what has been a pet peeve of mine, because I always believe that I cannot imagine for a moment why we'll be pumping water all through the country when we could just put tanks and have and reservoirs and so on, and just have gravity feed the communities like every developed country in the world. So the simple things that we can fix don't matter. And they just don't care. They're like desilting the rivers and stuff like that. People don't care because the motivation is for power and for self-growth and so on. And everywhere you turn, everywhere, and especially now that we are into a local government election, you're seeing this emphasis on bacchanal and the emphasis on people talking about themselves and how great they are and how great their party is, and nothing about the country and nothing about the average man. And that's the crux of the whole thing. Nobody cares about the person. Nobody cares about the businesses that support the people that live in the country. So all of the policies that you see are coming down the road are done haphazardly without thinking for a moment that, for example, a simple thing like re-registering your company every year, your annual returns, making that simple would encourage people to do business, but nobody cares about that. They make it as complicated and as difficult as possible. That's just the nature of the governance of Trinidad and Tobago.
This attitude of not caring, this attitude of not wanting to listen, how much of a costly mistake is this to Trinidad and Tobago society?
Well, it's a costly mistake to the people, again, because you see, if you look at what's happening when the government is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, one turns to the opposition and say, well, perhaps, whether it's Trinidad or the United States or any other country, you look at the opposition and say, let me see what is the alternative. And unfortunately, in Trinidad, our main opposition party is going down the very same road that the government is going down. They rely on bacchanal and stories that may or may not be true, or tinged with some level of racism and so on, just to get their core supporters excited and so on to come out and vote and so on. It's not about what are we offering in terms of solutions. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. In local government election is coming up on August 14th.
Mm-hmm.
And local government is perhaps the most important aspect in terms of management of a country. Local government directly interacts with the people in the community, whether it's they clean their drains, whether it's just fixing a bridge, whether it's painting a road sign and so on. But so now this is an excellent opportunity for people to go into the communities and show that the playgrounds are not being kept, the lights are not being changed, the pavilions are falling apart. Look what you're doing to our sporting thing. The beaches are not being cleaned. And you can bring so many issues in local government that you can say, listen, as a community now, under our party, we can fix this if you put this councillor, that councillor, and that councillor in place. But instead, what you're getting is people talking about who crossed the floor and who party is more bacchanalish and who is, there's a whole lot of story about, oh, we are now joining up with this one, so we're going to be stronger here, and we're going to give them real thunder here, and that kind of stuff. Nothing to do with how you're going to improve local government. This is just the fundamentals. I had a meeting last night where a lot of very intelligent people were talking and given serious consideration of how do we deal with food security. And we were actually commending, I don't know if you're aware of this, Ketan, but the Moruga Hill rice is now available.
Yes, online, yeah.
And we were talking about expanding our products or agricultural products to meet international standards, and in so doing, we're going to be feeding our own selves. We talk about how we can have just enough organic sugar to join that organic sugar market and to also use that molasses and so on to augment our rum industry and so on. So it's a serious food production, and how you get employment and economic activity stemming from agriculture is a major aspect of how the country can go forward. But nobody wants to talk about that. If you started like we're doing now, talking about things that matter, if we start talking about how we can systematically go through the various roads that we have in the country. And let me tell you, it's a small country. It's 70 miles by 40 miles. So Trinidad is, and Tobago is also another small, much smaller. So in terms of our roadway, we don't have a whole lot of roads, and we can fix every piece of road so you can drive through these places with ease. And if you were to ever go to places like Barapur or Rio Claro or Moruga or so on, the roads are horrendous. And that's another area that we can talk about, that we can fix overnight. These are the things that require years and years of planning and billions of dollars. But what it requires is it requires a government and a people that are constantly looking at what is wrong with our country and how do we fix that. And if the government isn't doing it, and more so, the population isn't doing it, doesn't care about it. You don't hear people quarreling about the fact that WESN just dig up a hole on St. Lucian Road right at the corner, and they repair the pipe and they leave a bump there. So now people on a blind corner have to try to maneuver around the repairs that WESN made.
Mr. Alvarez,
but nobody complains.
Well, what's interesting is that a most recent experience is that there was a piece of road in, it's actually the Paja Road in Tunapuna that needed paving for years. Now, of course, with local government elections right around the corner, it was done a couple of weeks ago. Following it being paved, the very next morning, it was paved overnight, the very next morning, there were 3 leaks in the road, which means the leaks existed before, but they paved over the leaks. WESN came a couple of days later to repair the leaks. Of course, a brand new piece of road is now plagued by further potholes. So you kind of sometimes wonder what's the logic or thinking behind it. That's just another example. But you mentioned something there about the citizens and the community not doing anything about it. Are we accomplices to our own demise in the sense that we actually want this kind of politics? We actually appreciate this kind of politics because we too support, quote unquote, the bacchanal.
Well, I mean, it's the excitement that we get from the bacchanal. We sort of sit down and when we hear these people talking about the bacchanal, that's when we get all tuned in. once we hear people talking about economic issues and agricultural issues and road repairs and stuff like that, and land erosion and landslides and so on, it's kind of boring. It is not, and that is because really the structure of government, and that is perhaps why some parties did not participate in local government election, because the structure of government in its present format makes local government a farce. And let me take a little minute to explain this to you. If your local government councillors and your local government structure is totally dependent on your central government for funding and central government for whatever activity you need to do, then you don't have a local government. You really have a central government that is using another arm of their party to do what is required. So as a result of that, people in the communities have a feeling of helplessness. So if you have a leak, and you would know this, Ketan, if you have a leak in front of your house, you have to call WASA headquarters in St. Joseph, because you cannot go to the WASA person in your community and say, listen, we have a leak here, and that person lives in the community and could come and fix it, and then they would bill WASA and so on. The structure for management of our country does not exist. So that what we inherited, for example, where police, we have, I think, 80-something police stations, and those were constructed in communities so that in every community in Trinidad and Tobago, there could be a structured police patrol. And that's why those 80-something police stations were there. So that in areas where it was heavily populated, like Belmont and downtown Port of Spain, where you have Besson Street Police Station and Belmont Police Station and St. James Police Station, you had more, just so that enough policemen could be on patrol in those communities. When you do not have this sort of responses to these things, because the structure does not support it and you're depending on central government for everything, that's when you have a problem. And that's the problems that we face in Trinidad and Tobago. We have structures that everything goes back to central government. And if you really want to take it further, in central government, everything goes back to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Because it's the Prime Minister that makes the decisions with his cabinet, and then they decide what's happening. So the country is really de facto ruled by one person.
Mr. Alvarez, in your opinion, with regards to and you mentioned this in your column as well, that every day you hear citizens making suggestions, you hear voices, making suggestions, as you have made yourself this morning. In fact, on previous occasions, you've also mentioned WASA with respect to utilizing our resources to ensure that gravity does its part in water distribution. Why is it that such voices are ignored? Is it this continued hunger for power of which you've elaborated on this morning?
Well, it's a little more complex than that. It's take, for example, with flooding, the downtown area is flooded, especially the Sea Lots area is flooded every time you have a half an hour of rain. There's a retention pond that was created under the previous administration on South Key. That retention pond has now been filled with silt and so on, and it's no longer a retention pond, it's just a grassland right now. It will take a few trucks and an excavator one day to clear the retention pond and deal with flooding. Immediately stop the flooding that you have on the end of East Port of Spain by South Key area, because it worked for years while the retention pond was cleared and so on. So you never had the flooding in across Abattoir Road and so on in the market and so on. But if you were to ask the city corporation to do that, or you were to ask a contractor to do that, and it happens within 1 or 2 days, there's not the room for the level of corruption that and feedback of money going to this one and that one. So much of what we do is dependent on who benefits on the long run, and that's the problem that we have as a country. So we know the solutions, we know the problems, of course, because we face the problems every day. But just dealing with those solutions in a pragmatic manner would mean that we may, in so doing, circumvent others from getting the little kickbacks and money that going back to whoever is giving out these contracts and so on. And therefore everything remains stagnated until things are put in place so someone can benefit indirectly from whatever projects have to be done. But retention ponds are a perfect example of what is required to deal with our flooding situation. And of course, we're doing nothing about it. And that's just one of the many solutions that other people have come across. Lots of people have come across and said, listen, this is how we deal with agriculture. This is how we deal with water distribution. This is how we deal with flooding. And so many fantastic opinions have come across with how to deal with criminal activity in our communities, how to deal with our young people and offer them hope and offer them a chance to see themselves just living for the next, say, 15, 20 years and having a family and so on. That sort of inspiration of hope in our communities, to do that would require change in government.
Why is it that we are accepting of all these excuses? You mentioned that the excitement from the bacchanal is appealing to us. But it seems to me that we are constantly accepting of excuses, even to the extent that many a times we go out of our way to justify excuses. And it goes back to the question again, accomplices to our own demise.
Well, Ketan, there's a fantastic passage I came across in this book that I'm reading by Dennis Mahabir, and he was saying that it was a conversation, and in the 40s, people weren't very politically correct about the terms that they used. So there were the N words and the C words and so on. But he was saying that there was an argument in the book where people were saying, do you want the N people to rule us, or do you want the C people to rule us? And he made the argument that, listen, unless we see ourselves as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and not as Indians and Africans, unless we see ourselves as one people living in a nation that have to build a nation, we are going to have a problem. And he says in this book, perhaps we're not ready for governance. Perhaps the colonialists should rule us for a bit longer. And that was in 1940. We're now talking 50 years after. And we both know nobody wants to talk about it because nobody wants to come across as being racial or dealing with the race card. But one of the major impediments to progress in Trinidad and Tobago is that we see ourselves as a sect and not as a country. Because if we saw ourselves as a country, we'll have our best engineers, our best architects, our best doctors, our best lawyers, our best professionals in the police service emerge. But instead, we have all kind of talk about manipulation of lists and manipulation of the selection processes and so on, because we're not seeking our best from among us, because we don't see ourselves as a country. We see ourselves as a sect of people either following one group or the other, or distrusting, perhaps more importantly, distrusting of the other, which is really silly, because at the end of the day, we all live here. We all travel along the same roads. We all eat in the same restaurants. We all support the same sporting teams and so on. It's only in the politics that we see this division. And it's happening now again, that because one person, for example, may leave one party to go to the next one, is seen as a traitor to the sect. And those things are the subliminal messages they're subliminal, but they're real. And if we don't accept the fact that they're real, then we are really pulling the blinds in front of our eyes. We have to accept that these are the realities that we deal with as a country. Every time we talk about a problem, we look at okay, so there's a lot of problem of flooding and potholes in Barco. I have actually heard people say, well, Barco don't count. Why? Because Barco don't support the government. You see? So you don't see, there's no situation where you look at a country and say, listen, how do we fix our country? it's how do we fix the sect. And when it comes down to not only how do we fix the sect, it actually goes down to how do we fix the self.
Mr. Alvarez,
And how,
I think, given the time that we have, we're actually running out of time. I think that's the perfect way to actually conclude this morning's discussions. Your column is very, very intriguing. I'm glad we were able to expand on this discussion, and I would encourage viewers, if you get the opportunity, it was actually printed, published in yesterday's Trinidad and Tobago Newsday newspaper. Mr. Alvarez, thank you very much for making the time to join us this morning. Very quickly.
And I would just want to admonish the people of Trinidad and Tobago that, listen, it's this now, a lot of years, decades have passed since our independence. Let us come together as one people. Let us put Trinidad and Tobago first. Let's, for once and for all, seriously get rid of all the underpinnings of racism that exists in our society. And let's see each other as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. If we do that, every single problem that we face, we can solve because we can do it together. We have the people, we have the personnel, we have the love for each other. We just have to not take on those people who are continuing to seek to divide us for their own selfish gains.
But do we have the hope?
We definitely have the hope. And I'm telling you, as we go forward, we have to come together as one people driven by the hope for better tomorrows.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvarez, again once more for joining me on the program. Very much appreciative of it, and do have a good day. All the very best.
Thank you, Ketan. Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. Have a good day.
Take care.